All right, welcome to part 2 of It Stands to Reason. This is the second list in a series of talks through rhetorical devices that you might see on the AP Language multiple choice exam, or you might use in the AP Rhetorical Language Analysis essay. So if you missed part 1, you can find it in the AP Language playlist, along with other lists that deal with rhetorical devices. But let's jump in and finish this list. All right, so word number 17 is DIRIMENS COPULATIO. Now, I think that's how it's pronounced. I looked around in a couple places, but I guarantee you're probably not going to use that in everyday discussion anyway. But this rhetorical device is mentioning opposing facts of an argument in order to prevent it from being one-sided or unqualified, right? For certain audiences, especially like a hostile or an unconvinced group, a one-sided argument is frustrating or suspicious or just untrustworthy. So one way to address like a potentially resistive audience is to balance the arguments with opposing evidence. It also shows that the author's informed and aware that there are two sides to an issue, and that author is willing to engage the debate rather than just ignoring contradictory information. It can be a powerful rhetorical strategy that brings credit to the author for being willing to talk about the other side. Number 18 is enumeration. So when you think of a causal relationship, enumeration is really walking an audience through the parts or facets of an issue. You're kind of detailing the causes and then effects and consequences in order to make a point, more forcibly. It becomes a more vivid example. One reason you might do enumeration, or an author uses enumeration, is to educate an audience that really just might not have the full picture, or maybe it makes the connection between the cause and effect because it isn't just clear and obvious right away. So connecting all the dots for the audience is really useful to bring about some clarification. It's a way to really bring an understanding to why something is occurring. And then another reason to enumerate is to heighten the impact of the example, especially if the cause and effect builds in intensity. It can really get people to engage in what the author is trying to explain. Number 19, exemplum, isn't too hard. It's Latin meaning for example. So it's simply giving an example. So when an author uses for example or for instance, he or she is going to give an exemplum. But it has also come to mean where you use an illustrative story, whether it's a true story or it's hypothetical, to make a moral or ethical point, right? Exemplums can make a lesson or the advice that an author is giving and make it more real. So authors are going to choose to tell a story because stories for people tend to have a bigger impact and make a bigger impression than just statistics or numbers because they can really feel it more. So exemplum is just an example, sometimes to make a moral point. 20 is generalization. A generalization is not usually a positive term, or always. A generalization is basing a claim or a statement on an isolated example. So it's true for this situation, so I'm just going to make it true for this situation as well. I just apply it equally. Sometimes a generalization can make logical sense. Like when we say driving under the influence of alcohol is dangerous, we can generalize that driving under the influence of other controlled substances is also dangerous. But other generalizations will assume a claim is true rather than just probable or perhaps true. If we know about a couple corrupt politicians, it's a generalization to say all politicians are corrupt. In most cases, a generalization is a weak way to further an argument. I even have to be careful saying that because I don't want to make too great of a generalization about generalizations, if you know what I'm saying. The next one, 21, is HYPOPHORA. Again, working hard at the pronunciations here. But HYPOPHORA is bringing up one or more questions and then proceeding to answer them, usually with like a thorough explanation. So does this sound like a rhetorical question to you? It kind of does, but a rhetorical question doesn't give an answer. And the way that rhetorical questions are written, an answer doesn't have to be given because the author already expects you to agree, and so the answer is implied, and assumed by the author that you're going to have the same answer. So in HYPOPHORA, the author asks the question and then takes time to answer the question in detail. Kind of like what I just did. Boom! Number 22, I'm going to say metabasis. Sometimes in writing, an author needs to remind the reader where they've been and where they're headed, especially if it's been a complicated discussion, right? So a metabasis is a brief statement of what was said before and what's coming up. It can also be called, and you might hear it called, a linking summary or a transitional summary. The whole point is to kind of keep the writing ordered and clear and easier to follow. So metabases are really helpful in a speech if the audience has no notes or no outline, because it just recaps what the speaker was trying to communicate earlier and then gives an idea of where the speaker is going. So if it is a complicated discussion, you might see an author sum something up and then point in the direction that they're heading. Right, 23 is another hard one to pronounce, PROCATALEPSIS. The definition of PROCATALEPSIS sounds a lot like DIRIMENS COPULATIO, whatever I said before. DIRIMENS COPULATIO is bringing up opposing facts in an argument, but PROCATALEPSIS is bringing up possible objections to an argument to answer them before the audience can argue them. So what PROCATALEPSIS does is allow an author to continue to move an argument forward because it addresses the opposition and gives some answers to their protest. So just like DIRIMENS COPULATIO, an author uses this rhetorical device because it can build trust with an audience and make the author seem more reliable as he or she is aware and engages in discussion with opposing ideas rather than seeming to ignore them. So it's more, instead of giving facts, it's addressing objections, perhaps counterclaims, and that kind of idea. Okay, realism, number 24. Realism is an author giving a faithful picture of reality. It makes a situation more believable to an audience. So you can imagine that there's going to be a lot of description and imagery in order to communicate the details of what an author is describing. That's how they're going to achieve realism. So if a situation is like bleak or tragic, realism can give emotional weight and impact of how authentic a writer makes it seem. They don't have to rely on other rhetorical devices, maybe like metaphor or things like that, because realism depicting what they see in the actual situation is powerful enough. So the last word in this list, number 25, is syllogism. Syllogism is a form of reasoning, or it's an argument where you come to a conclusion from two other premises. So some syllogisms are valid and some are definitely wrong. So let's do a really simple one just to give a basic idea. First premise, all animals breathe. Second premise, dogs are animals, so therefore the conclusion, dogs breathe. So there are technically at least 4 types of syllogisms, which we're not going to go into, but they all basically have the same format. The problem with the syllogism is when one or both of the presumptions are just assumed to be true. You can have a false conclusion with a syllogism. So like this example, what if I said, I love the clothes at Old Navy. Her sweater is from Old Navy, therefore I love her sweater. That's not necessarily true. That sweater could be ugly and I might hate it. So the first statement there, I love the clothes at Old Navy, is a generalization that doesn't apply to every single article of clothing. So the conclusion is not guaranteed to be valid. So that's what's called a syllogistic fallacy. So authors may use syllogism because it helps them argue or back up a claim, but the careful reader needs to recognize potential weaknesses in a syllogism. So that's the last word in the list. It stands to reason. Remember, this is part 2 of this particular list of rhetorical devices, and there are several other videos that cover different rhetorical devices in other categories. So check them out on the playlist. Hey, thanks for watching. Would love it if you could take a moment and just subscribe to the channel. If you are looking for the rest of the playlist for rhetorical devices, right here in this playlist is where you'd find that. I also have a playlist reviewing literary terms, and I'll put that playlist right here. And then, you know what, just something fun. Check this out. You got to loosen up. You can't study all the time. Would love for you to check out this playlist. Thanks for watching. Until next time.